University of Law podcast and our 24 questions in 2024 series. I'm Alex Gills, an LLB student studying at Bristol campus, and today I'm joined by John Watkins, who is Director of the Employability at the University of Law. So hello, John, and welcome to the podcast.
Hello, Alex. Thanks very much for having me. It's great to be here.
Pleasure to see you as well. And I guess the first place to start is perhaps telling us a bit about you and your role at the university.
Sure, yeah. Well, I've been at the university for 8.5, coming up to 9 years now. And my role really as Director of Employability is to reinforce the importance of that word that gets used an awful lot, employability. Not everybody knows exactly what it means, and some people translate it in different ways. And it's actually evolved, I think, over the last 8.5 years as the world has been through a few ups and downs. But essentially, it's trying to support every single student, whatever course they're studying, whatever their background, their past achievements, successes, failures, preferences, to help them with the next phase of their journey, which in most cases is looking for employment, the start of a career. In some cases, it's a transition from one career to the next. And for most, there's going to be a period of time after they've got that initial job where they're going to be hopefully progressing and succeeding within the workplace. So it's trying to sow some seeds about the things that might matter a little bit further down the line, as well as helping people in the immediate term.
And then that's a superb description of your role. And then what do you enjoy most about your role of kind of studying the career paths into employment?
It's very varied. I mean, no two individuals are the same. So even if you've got people who want to be lawyers and they want to work in corporate law, how that translates in terms of their route into it and what they will end up doing once they're there is always very different. And there's so many different areas of law. There's many areas of business which many of our students are interested in going into. So variety, I think, is the key. Lots of different employers out there as well, with different attitudes, different desires, different ways of operating. And lots of different types of support that we offer, which will range from one-to-one, a very personal conversation, through to a more group discussion where you get ideas bouncing around, workshops, which I know you've attended in the past, where you get some sort of new ideas put across, and you can see, looking across the room, it's dawning on certain people things that you're saying that may not instantly translate, but at some point during the course of the next year, 2 years, 3 years, something you've said may well have an impact on something quite important in their lives. And it's nice to be able to have that sort of opportunity to influence at what is a really pivotal point of people's development.
I know you touched on it a bit there, but could you, I guess, explain a bit more detail about some of the of kind of what the employability service offers, and I mean, you know, how you support students, as you said already, but the workshops and stuff like that?
Yeah, I think, there's an offer for every student, however many times they want to have a conversation one-to-one with somebody who will support them in a non-judgmental capacity to be able to help them determine what they're interested in, how they can go about pursuing it, and then to navigate through all those different phases of a recruitment stage. So from CVs, interviews, applications, online tests, interviews, assessment centres. So all of those sort of steps along the way on a one-to-one basis. And to help people understand what it is that employers are looking for. So academic achievement, which we leave to our fine colleagues in the academic team to help people with. But then work experience, the opportunity to show that you know what it's like out there. You've been in environments where perhaps you've had to deal with difficult people. You've had to manage your time. You've had to solve problems. Those actually can be translated from a hobby or a part-time job into something that really is well understood. But of course, for our law students, there's nothing better really than work experience with real-life clients and real-life solicitors. So pro bono pushed very firmly as being something that does equip you with some really powerful skills, dealing with people in quite difficult situations and helping them. And from that, realizing just how much of an impact you can have through this wonderful qualification of a law degree that opens up the doors for you to be able to really make a difference, which I think, again, a lot of people really enjoy being able to do.
And then how did you enable or kind of propel yourself into the field of employability in the first place, John?
Well, I guess when I'm involved in helping people make career decisions, it's ironic, really, that many of the decisions that I've made have sort of been made for me, or have taken a path which I didn't realise at the time, and nobody influenced me. So, like many of my colleagues, I think probably the role I'm involved in is one that is helping people to avoid making some of the mistakes, or to take care of people in a way that maybe I wasn't. So, I didn't really know what I wanted to do. I did have a year as a paralegal back in the late 1980s, and decided I didn't want to be a lawyer, but I did enjoy office life. So that gave that a firm tick in the box. But I pursued life as an accountant, and enjoyed it very much, and sat round the tables with many clients who were looking for legal advice, financial advice, and other advice as well. So very familiar with professional services. But in the end, I decided actually, that I had an interest and perhaps a talent for the learning and development space. I enjoyed developing people and helping them to deal not so much with the technical elements of accountancy, but actually how to deal with the people side of things, how to manage people, how to get the best out of them, how to deal with clients, whether they be nice and friendly or difficult and nasty, and to think about some of the other things that come into play as you go further up your career, developing business, networking, dealing with office politics, those sorts of things. So I gradually got more and more into that space internally, and then went out to schools and universities to help the recruitment campaign, and said, look, I'm going to help you when you get to the firm to develop those skills. Why don't you start thinking about them at an earlier stage? And I found at universities a very receptive audience who were perhaps a little bit influenced by the first episodes of The Apprentice, and seeing behavior in a work setting, and realizing that actually it could have major ramifications. It could be entertaining, but it also did throw up some things that maybe in a traditional workplace may not be the best things to do. So there was an appetite for listening to someone who'd been there and done it. And ultimately, I got made redundant in 2012 when times were a little bit tougher in professional services, and it fell nicely for me that it coincided with the arrival of an increase in tuition fees for university students, i.e. universities were starting to think about how they gave a return on investment to students in a slightly more sophisticated manner. And of course, I possessed the knowledge about what students would need when they got into the workplace, but also that accounting mindset that realized that if people are paying for something, they want something in return. So I just happened to be in the right place at the right time. Started off in a non-specialist university, but when I got the opportunity to come to the University of Law, recognizing that professional services was my background and that law students were very, very similar to accounting trainees that I'd seen, it just seemed to be a natural fit.
And I think I'll probably may know the answer to this one before I ask it, but when would you kind of advise people to start getting support from employability services in the first place?
Well, we make a big deal, certainly for undergraduates, of trying to sow the seeds early on and give people a message of we're here from day one. And indeed, even at open days, we'll say to people, why not start thinking about how you can help yourself immediately? But I'm also a very firm believer that people have to come to it when they're ready, and people develop at different stages. They have different motivations, and there isn't a one size fits all. And I've certainly seen people on day one who've been ready and raring and very receptive to messages. And you think, well, that's great because you're starting right at the beginning. But if somebody's not ready, then really it's a waste of time to try and force it upon. So, we'll see plenty of alumni who will come along and say, well, I concentrated on my studies. I had to work in order to fund them, so I was working quite hard. So I didn't really have time to seek out the support that you guys can offer. But now that I finished those things, I'm really keen and receptive to support. And when you come at it with a willingness to really engage, then it's both parties can put 2 and 2 together and make 5. If one party's trying really hard, but the other one's a bit unwilling, then it's probably going to end in tears. So I think it's about trying to give people the incentive to want to come forward early, giving them the confidence, giving them the self-belief, and also just the permission, in a sense, that it doesn't matter if you don't know what you want to do. It doesn't matter if you feel that you've got poor experience. Actually, we've seen everybody in every different shape and size, and nothing will surprise us, particularly post-pandemic, with so many people having to perhaps put into context some of the experiences they've had. We can help everybody move forward, whether that's from a slow starting point or from a very healthy one.
And I guess building on that one, if someone, when they do come forward and want to access the employability services, kind of what are your 3 tips to improve their kind of employability prospects for the future?
Well, I mean, I think you have to recognise that that employers are still very much looking for people who bring intellectual capability. Even if people are not going on to a legal career from the University of Law, they're going on to hopefully do something which is going to be intellectually demanding. So I think if you can prove through your academic studies that you are performing well, that's got to be a good thing. You can always succeed if that's not the case, but it makes it an awful lot easier if you haven't got to worry about explaining slight shortcomings there. But then I think it's really about sort of throwing yourself into situations where you have the opportunity to develop the skills to the highest level. So don't play safe and just do the easy things. If somebody comes along and says, will you do this? You think, well, I can do it, therefore, yes, but I can't do it, therefore, I'll decline. You're going to be very limited in what you can achieve. So it's almost the encouragement. If somebody says, can you do something and you've never done it before, that should be the incentive to say yes, because even if I struggle with it, I'll get better and then I can add that to my repertoire. And when you're looking in recruitment processes and then subsequent promotions, once you get into the workplace, most people have got skill levels, skills at certain levels, but the ones that stand out are the ones that perhaps have been in situations where, they've been asked to use those skills to a higher level. And you can throw yourself in pretty quickly to university life, becoming a student rep, getting involved in pro bono from quite early on. Those sorts of things will take you out of the comfort zone and make you stronger as a result.
And I know we've definitely touched on it so far, but what type of work experience or opportunities are available to students to kind of gain the employability skills? So I know you've mentioned pro bono, so you might want to kind of dig into that one a little bit more, but yeah, what's available for students?
Yeah, well, I think first and foremost, a lot of people come to the university with things that they've done or already doing at the moment outside of university. And those are very valuable and very important. And very often people will perhaps be a little bit worried, should I be taking more advantage of some of the things that are going on? Well, from a purely employability perspective, if you're developing skills outside of the work, outside of the university, then I'm very pleased and delighted that you're doing it. So any job, whether it's part-time or slightly more so at certain points in the year, is likely to be something that's full of transferable skills. Dealing with people, solving problems, managing time, those will translate across very nicely. But you do want to show your future employers that you've got some relevant experience. So if you want to go into law, then anything at all that you can do which actually showcases an interest, a familiarity, a capability with law is very good. And sometimes you don't know which areas of law you want to go into. So that's where pro bono is so useful, in that you are under the supervision of someone who knows exactly what they're doing. So you've got the safety net. You've got likelihood of meeting and dealing with people who are going to require you to use a set of skills. But the areas of law that you could potentially be helping people with could be very wide and varied. And you might discover areas that you didn't know before or didn't think you'd like before are actually the things that you're really good at. And of course, also trying things, whether it's in pro bono or other forms of volunteering or paid work, perhaps will develop an interest or skills in other areas. So you happen to be strong financially, or you enjoy marketing, or HR is the thing that you get excited by. And then you start to think, well, how could I use those things? Even if I'm going to go into the law, it's quite helpful to understand finance and marketing. And if you're going to go into marketing, it's quite useful to have a background in law. And that's where, again, careers advice can be very helpful. Where should I take my talent? Should I use it in the conventional sense in the law, or should I take it somewhere else and have the bonus that actually I bring a legal background as well?
While students are going from undergraduate to postgrad after LLB, there's obviously the solicitor's qualifying exam, and the second stage of that is getting qualified work experience. Could you kind of explain a bit more what counts as qualified work experience?
Yeah, I mean, we're still in that transition phase at the moment where people are understanding there's a difference between a training contract and qualifying work experience. If we roll the clock forward a few years, then people will know that this thing called a training contract existed, but they won't know the detail behind it. But I guess for people listening today, they might have a bit of familiarity with both. There's a lot of similarities. They both constitute 2 years, and they both constitute gaining relevant work experience that will help you to complement the studies and be ready to go and hit the ground running as a qualified solicitor. But I think the difference really is that qualifying work experience is a little bit more flexible. It was brought in with the SQE regime to try and make the profession a bit more accessible, to try and prevent a sort of build-up of qualified LPC students who couldn't go on and get to the next stage. So qualifying work experience is defined as anything that you do which involves the provision of legal services. So it must have a legal context, and you must be giving a service that is legal to somebody. You must be developing or have the opportunity to develop at least 2 of the competencies required to become a solicitor. And you must have somebody who is a qualified solicitor in the UK confirm that you have done this. So those are the 3 things to require. You can apply that test really to almost everything that you do. Am I providing legal services? And that will have some fine lines, but in most cases it'll be a clear yes or clear no. Do I have the opportunity to develop 2 competencies? Well, almost everything that you do will have the opportunity to develop it. Whether you actually develop it actually isn't required. So I think you're fairly safe on that front. And then the one which some people are finding a little difficult is, have I got somebody who will put their name to it and say, yes, I approve it? And in most traditional law firms, that was the training principle. And you've got probably a structure where people will know what's going on and be happy to do it. But in some of the smaller firms or outside of practice where this is not so familiar, then there can be a bit of worry. What am I putting my name to? What happens if there's a problem? And in some cases, people are working overseas. There isn't a UK qualified solicitor. Sometimes people have done work 2 years ago, which probably meets the tests, but they can't find somebody to actually approve it. So there's a little bit of an issue in there. And again, where the Employability Service can hopefully signpost and steer and advise, even if in some cases, there is an obstacle to clear. But the bottom line is it's 2 years worth of experience that complements the studies that you've done, and therefore allows you to feel that you can hit the ground running as a qualified solicitor, studies, work experience, ready for the world.
And I guess in kind of linking that to, getting ready for the real world, as a student, we can apply for mentoring from solicitors and barristers, and obviously business professionals. So what opportunities and benefits does a mentoring scheme sort of provide?
Well, we're in the midst of the mentoring scheme for the January starters. And I must admit that having looked at some of the stats this morning, the demand has been as high this year as I can ever recall seeing. So I think what the students feel is, well, here is somebody who's been there and done it, is either, 1 or 2 or 3 years ahead of me, or 20, 30, 40 years ahead of me. And both have, different benefits. But I think it's about somebody who's ultimately in a place that you quite fancy knowing more about. We know that, again, it varies quite a lot between students. Some are very clear about what they want to do, and they're looking for somebody who can help them add that extra 5%. Others just have no familiarity with the legal profession at all. And therefore, somebody who works as a lawyer is the first time perhaps that they've really had contact with somebody who is in a profession that they perhaps look forward to going into. We have people who've got disabilities. We've got people who've got different backgrounds, sometimes specifying they would really like to be mentored by somebody who's been in their situation, understands what it's like to come from their background. So we try and match up as carefully as we can. But it's also it's two-sided, because what the mentors say is, well, it's nice to give back because, we are in a privileged position of being in the profession, and it's nice to be able to help the next generation. But actually, we learn a lot as well. The next generation are very, very aware of the climate. They're very connected to a technology and aware of the AI revolution. They're also very interested in diversity, equality, and inclusivity. And whilst those things have always been in workplaces, the focus on them now is much, much greater than it was before. So somebody who's in the profession, who might be managing the next generation coming through, begins to understand what sorts of things are going to matter to the people they're managing. And they're probably quite different to actually what mattered to them when they were coming through the ranks. So to develop that skill and awareness, I think, is quite important. So we certainly describe it as the proverbial win-win situation.
And then I guess doing a bit of a slightly deeper dive into the next generation, as you just said in that last answer, there's the development of AI that's becoming ever more prominent. How do you feel this is going to impact the job market for students and graduates today? I mean, I guess there's obviously good and bad aspects to it.
There are, yes, and plenty of unknowns. I mean, I had a talk that was given last year in one of our campuses. Somebody stood up and said, well, a lot of people have had 5-year business plans. That's been good practice for a number of years, is to set your stall out. Where are we going to be in 5 years? But AI moves so rapidly and changes the landscape so quickly that really your strategy can't be much more than 18 months, 2 years tops. So, you say that to a student coming in to do an undergraduate degree, then, the strategy of a business they might want to work for is going to be started again before they're 2/3 of the way through their degree. And even for a postgraduate student, just that 1 year, if you're doing it at full time, the difference between when you start your course and when you finish it could be quite material. So I think there's a sort of a time factor in there. Technology definitely has advantages and very positives. When I see a CV from a student that at the moment I can probably still tell has got a bit of chat GPT looking about it, there are not many spelling mistakes. The structure is often very good. There's probably a lot to be said for that being a more advanced version of a CV than I might have seen from a student who's tried their level best, but perhaps a bit way behind. But there's a big difference then between where it is and where it's got to get to, and what happens both in between. And then, of course, once you've managed to secure the opportunity to sit down in front of somebody for an interview or do the job, then you have to do the job rather than the technology. And I think that the beginning of 2024 has just, I think, thrown up a useful reminder to us with the post office scandal using technology from 20 years ago, which, was just really basic computers. And everybody said, well, this is wonderful. The post office and so many other places were made much, much more efficient because they had tools that would allow them to do some things much more quickly. But now hindsight has shown that actually it wasn't perfect, the technology. And humans weren't quite good enough either through their observation skills or then their leadership skills to do anything about it. And it got worse and worse and worse to the point where it's finally blown up. Now, that's not to say that technology will always do that, but actually the human element of it is quite important. And I think there's a place for sort of the balance to be struck to use technology sensibly, but we will be very wary, I think, about it taking over some of the things that do require human judgment, human discretion, empathy, some of those things which are, at the moment anyway, beyond AI.
And then you kind of said it in the last bit as well, but what sort of impact on the quality of kind of CV and job applications do you think are kind of happening with platforms such as ChatGPT? Because obviously there was technology that could make sure the spelling was correct, but I mean, that's another step up in terms of someone could write some of it online and it's not their own words in their own CV.
No, I mean, we've started to see application forms from employers saying, have you used AI as part of this application? And in one case, it says brackets, that's not to say it's right or wrong. We're just interested. And I think that's probably an indication of where some employers are, that they're just not quite sure themselves how it should be being used. Because you could answer that question and say, yes, I have used AI. I've got a busy life. Information was there for me to be able to do things in a much quicker fashion. Why wouldn't I? It would be totally daft not to. On the other hand, it is still probable that doesn't quite read naturally. It doesn't quite look as the way in which you might have constructed it had you written it yourself. So it doesn't sound like the you. And one of my top tips to people is always, when you're producing documents, there needs to be an authenticity. Your CV may look quite similar in some respects to somebody else's. It's got the same headings and you might have been to the same school and got the same results and done the same work experience. But that CV now needs to tell the story of you. It's very much your story. And therefore, there needs to be that authenticity. And, I'm not saying that AI is not capable of perhaps of making it sound a bit more like you, but actually you need to be comfortable with it yourself as the document that says this is me. But, I'm very much alert to the fact that as we go forward, that things will develop. And I often say to students, look, you can get to 7 out of 10 with your CV and application, which is a pretty healthy state to be in. And you can do that in a matter of seconds. But the difference between 7 out of 10 and 10 out of 10 is perhaps a bigger 3 than you might realize. And therefore, you've got to allow enough time. So put the time into that secondary part of the process so that you can really build on it rather than thinking I can get to where I want to be really quickly and take a shortcut. Because I think, you go through education, you go through a big process in your lives where actually, time is a really important thing. The more time you put into things, often the better quality. And maybe we've still got to remember that when it comes to technology at the moment.
And then I guess as a follow-up, do you think, or have you been told from employers that they can tell when there's a gap between maybe a CV that they've liked the look of, but then obviously someone's coming in person and then they've gone, there's quite a big gap between the quality of the candidate?
I think there's often a big gap, actually, and this is one of the consequences, downsides of the employability service. If I can critique my own department, we are there to try and help you look as good as you can be, to present a document as well as possible, to draw out the best bits of you, in the same way that the employer's website talks about the best bits about working there. Now, the employer's got some clients that are not that great. It's got some occasions when things don't go well. And all of us in our real lives have had things that have perhaps not gone quite so well, but we don't put those in our CVs. So I think that the test really in any interview is to try and extract, the things that are not in the CV, the relevant weaknesses, because you want to know what the person can't do as well as what they've told you they can do. So I think there's always going to be potentially the challenge of living up to expectations. And I think, my team and I will continue to have a very important role for as long as you see somebody on paper and they don't quite live up to it, or you see somebody who doesn't look that great on paper who is superb. And it's our job to try and make sure that those that are not as good as they could be can look and deserve to be as good as they can be. And those who perhaps look good on paper are supported with their interview preparation so that they can demonstrate themselves appropriately when in person, because they may have a great background, but actually they lack the confidence to interact in a one-to-one setting.
And earlier on, we had done the present of employability, and then that's a bit about the future. If I could just possibly drag you back to the past and kind of say, what is kind of the greatest or I guess best success story you've kind of witnessed at the time during being employability lead at the university?
Well, I was thinking about this overnight and this morning, and ironically, the example I'm coming up with has had a further twist to it today. So 4 or 5 years ago in the Moorgate campus, I delivered a talk to conversion students, a workshop, and they were very positive at the end of it. And many of them said, would you be willing to do another session for us? And I said, well, I will, but you're going to need to do the hard work. So, it's got to be worth my while. I need at least 10, 12 people to come. I need you to book the room, find a date that works for all of us. If you do the hard work, then I'll turn up and give you the skills session. And 2 students went away and they came back, and we arranged a date, and 20 to 25 students turned up for this session, which was very impressive. Just as that session was finishing, I got a phone call from the Vice Chancellor's people who said, John, do you know any employers who we can invite along to the inauguration of Lord Neuberger, which is taking place in a couple of days' time? We're a bit short on invitees. And I said, well, I'd be a bit embarrassed really to go back to employers at this stage, because they realised that they were a bit short notice. But I said, what about students? We should have students there because we're a university and that's what it should be. And I've got 2 students here who've just organised a really good event, and they, I'm sure they would be great upholding citizens for us. So can I invite them? And they were invited, and they came along, and they were fantastic. They really looked the part, they sounded the part. It was very difficult to know that they were students. They just seemed like any other professionals in a professional setting. I introduced them to Lord Neuberger, and they were so pleased to have the opportunity to meet the guest of honour. And then just as we were leaving, somebody who I'd met at a graduation ceremony came racing up and said, oh, you must come to my event at the House of Commons next week and bring your 2 friends with you as well. So those 2 individuals, because they had shown a positive attitude, because they had made an effort to stand out from the rest to their own benefit by getting the session, were rewarded with several opportunities. And it's a really good lesson to me that if you put yourself in the right place and you show the right attitude, then you end up with opportunities that other people don't get. And I'm sure that other students in that class may have said, well, how come these 2 people have got to go to the House of Commons? They got to meet Lord Neuberger. Well, why did they get it? It's not fair. And the answer is that they did something that earned them the opportunity. And the ironic thing is that one of those 2 has just come back to me today to say that they would like to be a mentor on the mentoring scheme. And they started off by saying, I don't think you'll remember me, but, and of course, I do remember them.
was going to say it's come full circle at that point, hasn't it? So
Absolutely, yeah.
And I guess from your last answer, one of the next three might be filled in. But what would you say are the top three skills needed in today's workplace?
I think you probably need to be fairly adaptable and flexible. More or less use those words interchangeably. So much happens now with short notice, so many things that you're a bit unpredictable, that I think you need to be on your toes and ready for things. I think communication skills, which is probably what I was told when I first started out, was really important. They still are, but it's a different form of communication. So you and I are speaking today in a different way to how we might have spoken back when I first started, where the telephone might have existed, but probably these things didn't. And the ability to be good online as well as in person, and also to be strong on the phone in front of large audiences, small audiences, and the diversity of people that you might have to deal with as well. That communication skill is really important. And people skills. We talked about AI, and the ability to work with and for machines is going to be very important. But so long as we still have people in the workplace, there are going to be people from aged 16 through till 80 plus, from all different backgrounds, all different attitudes, all different takes that you have to get on with. And you don't have to get on with them, I suppose, but that will limit you enormously in terms of your success if you're only good and capable of relating to certain types of people. And it does not make life more interesting if you've got such a wide diversity of people out there, and you can find the positives in them, find ways of engaging with them. So I do think that communication skills and people skills fit in nicely alongside adaptability as my top three.
I mean, would you also say the people skills with the development of technology? Do you think in-person skills are less natural to people now and have to be kind of taught a bit more than they would have been previously in the workplace?
I think probably yes, but I would certainly at this point be putting a very strong message out in terms of the capability of the current generation. It can be a generation that gets a bit of stick, and the reality is that every generation coming through lacks experience, so you can't criticize for that. But there is no doubt that there is more effort being made to help develop people at a much earlier stage than ever before. And the level of skill that I think most undergraduates, certainly that I see at the University of Law and then postgraduates, is vastly superior to anything that existed 20 years ago, even 10, 15 years ago. So I think we start off by the recognition that actually there's a lot more that people are capable of than they realize. But it's very complicated. People's lives are very, very complicated. There's an awful lot more things now that exist that previously didn't. And choice and options, sound great in theory, but they bring greater complexity. And again, without sort of getting into detail, I know that the team that I manage, the personal challenges that some of them face in their non-working lives that obviously knock onto their working lives are so much more complicated. And as a manager, dealing with them and supporting them and colleagues supporting them, our people skills have to be raised significantly beyond where they were in days where perhaps you kept yourself to yourself. What went on back at home, nobody really knew about. You just turned up and did a job, and you were only having conversations about work-related issues. Now, a lot of my conversations are related to issues outside of the workplace, which have a knock-on effect in the workplace. And I'm required and really do need to be able to support people in every facet of their lives.
And if I may, could I ask you what your proudest achievement in your career is up until now?
Yeah. I did a talk a couple of weeks ago at a school, and I was asked a similar question, and I had given a little bit more personal background into my journey. And I said to them with all honesty, hand on heart, if I look back now on 30 years, as somebody who's been out of university, my proudest achievement is the fact that I have been married for 28 years, that I have two sons. When I look back and think what really matters to me, what have I achieved in life? Well, of course, there have been highs and successes in the workplace, but it's been through having a stable and happy personal life and background that ultimately I think all of those things have been achieved. So it's a little bit cliche to say it, but certainly I think we have to put a lot of significance into friendships, support, relationships outside of work as well as in work. in the workplace, I still think my best days are ahead of me, Alex, and I still look forward to the pinnacle of achievement still to come. But when I go to graduation ceremonies and people come up to me and say thank you, it really touches me, and I sad, not always do I know if it's certainly been an online relationship where I might have done a talk to 20 people. I may not know who that person is, but I've said something or done something that's made them want to come up to me, especially, and say thank you. And every single thank you that you get makes you realize why you do the job, and you realize that you do have an impact on people's lives, and that really is very, very satisfying.
And then to just round up this section of the podcast, how would you describe the university's employability service in just 3 words?
3 words. Responsive, I think, is number one. I tell the team, there's lots of good careers and employability services out there at different universities, but we stand out because we are very quick to respond. If somebody comes through on a Saturday or a Sunday or in the evening and needs some support, then we tend to try and be able to be there. So the only day we're not officially open is Christmas Day. So responsive is definitely number one. Dedicated, the team is so committed to achieving success for students. They share with me the gratitude and success stories as if they're proud parents. So that dedication, I think, is really enormous. And then the third word, which I think has to be used slightly carefully, but I think we are quite diverse. Not in every different definition of the word, but improving in many of those traditional fashions. But the diversity of experience, the diversity of thought process, the diversity of ways of coming up to solve problems, I think has again been very, very helpfully shown by the pandemic. We used to have lots of individuals who operated quite individually, and now we get to share an awful lot more. And it's rarely that I come away from a week without thinking, gosh, that was really something very good that somebody suggested. I would never have thought of that. And when you've got a large team and people are coming in with ideas, then cumulatively that can make quite a difference. So responsive, dedicated, and diverse.
And without a doubt, I would 100% back that up. I as an employability ambassador, I know I need to, but it's also from personal experience that absolutely the employability team is absolutely amazing at the university as well. So
thank you.
I don't know what I was expecting you to say. So to round off the podcast and probably to get you to get to know you a bit better yourself, John, we've got 8 short outro questions for you.
Okay.
And the first one is, if you could change one thing in the world, what would it be?
I like the idea that when people answer questions, they start with the word yes. There's an awful lot of negativity, a lot of people that immediately their first reaction is no. So even if the answer is yes, but I can't do it now, or yes, but something needs to change, I think let's change the world by having the word yes more frequently used.
And then the next one is, if you were hosting a dinner party, would you, for me, name a guest, dead or alive, that you would like to invite, and why?
I've been asked this question a few times, and I've given different answers at different points in time. 2024 for me has been a strange year in the sense that I have made contact with somebody I was at university with and haven't spoken to for 30 years and had a really good conversation. I've also joined an alumni group of a place I used to work and have seen people appearing in that network that remind me of the good old days. And I've got a friend who I grew up with, who I haven't seen for many, many years. And perhaps, again, this is in keeping with my earlier answer to my proudest achievement. But I think I would really, and this is something I can do rather than the hypothetical one if they were dead. So it's to get back in touch with people who perhaps have been important in your lives at various points and have drifted away for one reason or another. So James Cato is the person that I would like to have at my dinner party.
And then, what is your favourite movie?
Favourite movie is Con Air, starring Nicolas Cage. Good action movie with some very, very good one-liners that always make me chuckle.
And what is your favourite way to relax when you aren't at the university leading the employability?
Cricket, I think, is the answer, and we're getting closer to the start of the next season. It's not a game for everybody, and I fully appreciate that. But I've loved it from childhood. I'm the chair of a cricket club, so I see its workings from the inside as well. Got a lot of enjoyment out of cricket over the years, and that would certainly be where I would spend my leisure time.
And if you were stranded on a desert island and could only take 3 items with you, what would those 3 items be?
Big fan of the radio. It'd probably have to be a solar panelled radio so as to keep it going, to keep music and news, whatever one could come through. And then being a bit more practical, I think probably you want to have a knife, because you might need to cut a few things up for shelter and for food, and maybe wary of anything that might be coming to attack you. And then a mirror, not for personal reasons and vanity, but it's very good for shining light and attracting attention and starting fires and other bits and pieces. So 2 practical ones alongside the radio.
Yeah, like those. What is your favourite place to travel to?
I went to Australia on a secondment back in 1997 and really enjoyed it. Spent a couple of months out there, did a little bit of travelling. It's a place I'd love to go to again. It's a huge place, obviously, and there's no one part of it that I particularly enjoyed or wanted to go to. But in terms of being on the wish list, back to Oz and do some good touristy things. There's amazing places, so that's where I'd like to go.
And then, who do you admire the most and why?
It's a really, really tricky question. I suppose one always looks sometimes to family members, and certainly got a great role model in my father. But I think it's anybody who sticks to their values, anybody that sticks to their guns, and there's a lot of times where people perhaps have to be a bit brave in speaking up. And obviously, down the years, some notable figures have put themselves in the firing line and said things and led to change. So anybody really who sticks to their principles, is prepared to stick to their values and speak up for themselves.
And then last but not least, what advice would you give to an 18-year-old self?
I think we're very different. Even sort of 5 years after that point in time, at 18, you're just literally turning into an adult. You're just about to experience what the next phase of life is all about. I would certainly say to me, don't worry about the academic mediocrity that I had attained in my first 18 years. That's not to say to anyone listening that they should strive for mediocrity and think that they can succeed otherwise. But academic side of things is important, but it takes less importance the further you go in your career. You need to be able to draw upon certain things that but more often than not, you are judged on the ability to get the best out of other people. So you rely upon their knowledge. So I would certainly say, don't worry that you weren't that brilliant academically. Other skills will come to the fore, and actually, I've been using those other skills for a lot more than 18 years now, and they've trumped the fact that the A levels are fairly modest, and my 2.2 degree is not something that I would ideally have wanted to get.
Well, the only thing to say is, thank you very much, first of all, for joining us today, John.
My pleasure, Alex. It's been lovely talking to you.
Thank you. And thank you for telling us all about the great work you do and what the employability team do as well alongside this. If you would like to learn more about our employability services at the university, then please visit our website, law.ac.uk. And do also follow us to keep up to date for our next episode. And thank you for listening.